In neoliberal capitalist countries and their sphere of influence, the struggles of women against patriarchal structures are often reduced to gender alone. This reduction is largely due to the efforts of capitalist, fascist regimes, oligarchies, and reactionary forces that place immense pressure on traditional heteronormative roles for women, both in the workplace and within the family. Proletarian feminism, however, offers a broader perspective by intertwining the fight for gender liberation with the revolutionary principles of Marxist-Leninism-Maoism. It seeks to liberate working-class women from the dual burdens of exploitation and oppression, positioning itself as an essential theory and practice within the larger movement for gender liberation. Proletarian feminism differs fundamentally from liberal feminism. While liberal feminism often seeks equality within the existing capitalist system, proletarian feminism insists that true liberation for women is impossible without the complete overthrow of capitalism and the establishment of a socialist state. This approach, developed by the Indian revolutionary communist Anuradha Ghandy, views patriarchy as not an isolated form of oppression, but as a component of broader class oppression. Patriarchy is rooted in class society itself and predates both capitalism and feudalism. It is an intrinsic part of any class-based society, regardless of the mode of production or distribution. Attempts to separate gender oppression from class struggle, Ghandy argues, ultimately leads to the failure of feminist practice, as they ignore the fundamental connection between the two. Proletarian feminism adheres to a Marxist, historical, and dialectical materialist analysis. In one of her most significant works, The Philosophical Trends in the Feminist Movement, Ghandy traces the historical and material conditions under which women have resisted their oppression. She observes that women have long articulated their oppression through various cultural forms, such as folk songs, idioms, poems, paintings, and other accessible art forms. Ghandy writes, quote, "It is not that earlier women did not realize their oppression, they did. They articulated this oppression in various ways. They also raged against the injustices they had to suffer. They interpreted and reinterpreted myths and epics to express their viewpoint. The various versions of the Ramayana and Mahabharata, for example, still in circulation among rural women through songs in various parts of India, are a vivid testimony of this." One example that highlights the patriarchal themes in Hindu mythology is the story of Draupadi in the Mahabharata. Draupadi, often reduced to her gender role and objectified by male characters, exemplifies the way women were seen as the property of their husbands, with little agency over their own bodies. In an article from the website Feminism in India titled Reinterpreting the Epics, Addressing Gender Politics While Preserving Rich Content, Shivani Ekanath discusses the spiritual and cultural significance of the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, and how women within these stories are often reduced to mere objects of men. Ekanath notes, quote, "Most of the female characters in our epics have very little choice when it comes to consent, marriage, and freedom of expression. Draupadi in the Mahabharata may have been the closest to what one would call a feminist icon, yet she is relegated to a fringe and is often used as a scapegoat in most of the decisive moments of the narrative." The story goes like this, more or less. The Kauravas and the Pandavas were two royal families. Together with his maternal uncle Shakuni, Duryodhana, the eldest son of the Kauravas, conspired to win a dice match against the Pandavas for their realm and wealth. King Yudhishthira of the Pandavas loses all of his possessions, his kingdom, himself, and even his brothers. He then puts Draupadi, his polyandrous wife, up as a wager to get everything back, but he inevitably loses. Draupadi becomes a slave to Duryodhana. Dushasana, Duryodhana's younger brother, forcefully brings Draupadi to the court. Draupadi appeals to the court of elders of the Kauravas, questioning the legality of her husband betting on her when he had already lost himself and his possessions previously. They rule in favor of Draupadi not being somebody that can be gambled, that no one has the right to put a woman on a bet according to Shastras, not a husband, father, or even a god. Then Karna, another prominent mythological character present in the court, gets angry and says that Yudhishthira lost Draupadi when he lost all of his possessions, equating her to property. He calls her a whore for being wedded to 5 men, and then instructs Dushasana to disrobe Draupadi, and no one objects to this. Draupadi prays to Krishna to protect her, and when Dushasana attempts to remove her garments, she is divinely protected, and while he pulls her garments away, she never becomes any less clothed. Dushasana becomes exhausted, and the court is in awe of Draupadi's chastity. They eventually restore their honor, but later on have another dice match in the same fashion, and Yudhishthira yet again loses and then goes into exile with his brothers and wife. I know, crazy story. Like many people seeking liberation from their oppressors, in different historical circumstances, their ideas and theories reflected the ideologies of the dominant mode of production and ruling class. Women seeking liberation through religious means was predominant because of the theoretical and philosophical underpinnings of class societies. Feudalism was dominated by theocratic monarchies, and so their solutions came in the form of religious myth and song and dance as an idealized form of escape. They did not understand the social and political forces around them, materially speaking, but they did understand their feelings of oppression and expressed this discontent and anger through various idealistic means. Anuradha Ghandy's analysis highlights that the women's liberation movement in India was also hampered by colonialism. Indian women found themselves torn between the old societal structures and the new ideas of women's independence emerging from the West. Similar to how Marxist ideas took root in Russia under the Tsar's feudalistic exploitation, Indian women began to see the roots of their oppression within the economic system itself. They exposed the gender-based division of labor under capitalism, which relegated women to the least skilled and least compensated social categories. Women's liberatory movements discussed in her critiques of liberal bourgeois feminism lacked a historical dialectical character seeking to rewrite Marx and Engels. They put the sex differences of men and women as the central contradiction, that the origin of women's subordination and man's domination lay in the reproductive roles of men and women. Particularly the ideas of Shulamith Firestone are critiqued in Anuradha's work. I will provide a quote from her critique, as it contains the original Engels writing and then the rewritten segment by Firestone. While Engels had written about historical materialism as follows, quote, "That view of the course of history which seeks the ultimate cause and great moving power of all historical events in the economic development of society, in the changes of the modes of production and exchange, in the consequent division of society into distinct classes, and in the struggle of these classes against one another." Firestone rewrote this as follows, quote, "Historical materialism is that view of the course of history which seeks the ultimate cause and the great moving power of all historical events in the dialectic of sex. The division of society into two distinctly biological classes for procreative reproduction, and the struggle of these classes with one another, in the changes in the mode of marriage, reproduction, and childcare created by these struggles, in the connected development of other physically differentiated classes, and in the first division of labor based on sex, which developed into the economic cultural class system." Ghandy makes an insightful critique in pointing out that women have played a very important role in social production, and to ignore this by instead focusing on women's reproductive role as the defining feature of a woman's struggle is in fact accepting the argument of the patriarchal ruling classes that women's social role in reproduction is most important and that nothing else is. Anuradha criticizes liberalism in her work, showing that it did not stand for the collective rights of society against theocratic hierarchy. It arose alongside capitalism as a reaction to the divine right of kings, of religious truth, instead focusing on the importance of the individual and their autonomy. Famous liberal thinkers and philosophers stood for the values of an ideal, legal equality between all men, though not materially. Women, however, were not included in this new social system. The bourgeoisie that had come into power by capitalism, who owned the means of production and exploited the labor of a developed and evolved working class in the 1800s, did not give these same inalienable rights to the poor and marginalized. Racial hierarchies were still heavily entrenched in society, as well as the gap between men and women in legal autonomy. These groups sought these same rights using the arguments and ideas of the ruling elite, their liberal individualism. Going a little bit back in time, let's take a look at Maoism and how it influenced the revolutionary thoughts of international gender liberation. Maoism, a development of Marxism that emphasizes the importance of the peasantry, guerrilla warfare, and continuous revolution, recognizes that patriarchy is integrated within class society and adapts to the material conditions of these different societies. Mao writes, quote, "In order to build a great socialist society, it is of the utmost importance to arouse the broad masses of women to join in productive activity. Men and women must receive equal pay for equal work in production. Genuine equality between the sexes can only be realized in the process of the socialist transformation of society as a whole. Quote, "Women hold up half the sky," is a phrase attributed to Chairman Mao after the CCP came to power in 1949, which became symbolic of the importance of women in the international struggle. Maoist thought emphasizes that women's liberation is inseparable from the broader struggle against class oppression. In this view, the emancipation of women is a critical component of the proletarian revolution. Gender oppression is seen not as a separate issue, but as a deeply intertwined one with the class struggle. And fun fact, in John Lennon's song Woman, he starts off by whispering, "for the other half of the sky," alluding to the phrase by Chairman Mao. Maoism advocates for the active participation of women in all aspects of revolutionary activity. This includes armed struggle, labor, and leadership roles. This approach challenged traditional patriarchal norms within revolutionary movements, insisting that women be recognized as equal participants in the fight for socialism. I really love this aspect of Maoism, as it gives more of a revolutionary character to the struggle of women and their emancipation, not only from the clutches of patriarchal domination, but from the exploitation of the bourgeoisie, and that's pretty awesome. Maoism differs from classical Marxism in its emphasis on the revolutionary potential of the peasantry, particularly in a semi-feudal and semi-colonial society. Mao recognized that peasant women, who were often doubly oppressed by both feudal patriarchy and capitalist exploitation, could be a powerful force in the revolutionary movement. During the Long March of 1934 to 1935, which was a retreat of communist forces from their base in Jiangxi, women played crucial roles in not only as combatants, but also in supporting the logistical and organizational needs of the communist forces. After traveling some 10,000 kilometers, or 6,000 miles for you Yankees out there, they arrived in northern Shanxi. An ideological struggle within the party led to the eventual recognition of Mao as their absolute leader, doing away with Bolshevik ideas and instead applying analysis to the specific conditions of China that they were a part of. The Communist Party of China, CPC, under Mao encouraged women to break free from traditional roles and contribute to the revolutionary cause, setting a precedent for their participation in the political sphere. During the Chinese Revolution and the subsequent establishment of the People's Republic of China, the CPC implemented policies aimed at improving the status of women. This included the marriage law of May 1950, which sought to abolish arranged marriages, child marriages, and concubinage, and promoted gender equality in marital relations. The law also provided for equal property rights for women, marking a significant shift from feudal practices. It also raised the marriageable age to 20 for men and 18 for women, banned marriage by proxy, which means that both parties must consent to the partnership. The law emphasized free choices of partners, equal rights for both sexes, respect for the elderly, and adequate care for the young among men and women. It also established a legal civil registry for marriages at the time. Maoist thought influenced feminist movements around the world, particularly in countries with strong communist or socialist movements. For instance, in India, the Naxalite movement, which is rooted in Maoist ideology, saw the active participation of women who fought against both gender and class oppression. Women have formed their own militias and taken up arms as part of the struggle. This has been seen as an empowering step, challenging the notion that women are inherently nonviolent or unsuited for combat roles. The Naxalite movement, which began in 1967 in the remote Naxalbari village in the eastern Indian state of West Bengal, is a currently ongoing Maoist revolution in India. The armed struggle began after a farmer was stopped from tilling his own field, and was initially put down by imperialist Indian forces after 72 days. And you know, when a righteous revolution is put down in one place, many more begin taking inspiration from it, and have also seen heavy state suppression, with the far-right Indian government labeling them as left-wing extremists. This is the backbone of the historical and material context in which Anuradha Ghandy had developed her ideas of proletarian feminism. She had even taken part in the 1969 founding of the Communist Party of India Marxist-Leninist. She was an integral part of the Dalit Panthers movement in 1974, inspired by the American Black Panthers movement, and eventually married a militant PCI member named Kobad Gandhi, who was captured and imprisoned in 2009. In the 1990s, she had been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis and began living in the region controlled by the Communist Party of India Marxist-Leninist, the People's War Guerrilla Army, for 3 years. In 2007, she was elected to the Central Committee of the newly founded Communist Party of India, Maoist, and was the only woman in that position of leadership at the time. And tragically, she died in a Mumbai hospital on the morning of April 12, 2008, from complications from malaria. It's possible that this was picked up when she was teaching Adivasi women in the forests of Jharkhand. She was labeled as a Maoist terrorist by the right-wing government of India. More accurately, a revolutionary that inspired thousands of men and women in the fight for a communist future. She died when she was only 54, leaving behind an incomplete body of work, made during her 30 years as an active revolutionary. Her activity and writings were the sole inspiration of this video, and her ideas are not to be overlooked whenever discussing Marxist ideas in the modern feminist context. The CPI Maoist has this to say as part of a party statement, quote, "The immediate aim of the party is to accomplish the new democratic revolution in India by overthrowing imperialism, feudalism, and comprador bureaucratic capitalism only through a protracted people's war. The ultimate aim of the party is to bring about communism." While there is still a great amount of work to be done in the context of the revolution in the Third World, it is undeniable the importance of women's struggle in the fight for socialism, in the fight for communism, and I think it is important to ask oneself, if you happen to be watching this in the First World or any country in the Western imperialist core, what exactly are we fighting for here? Are we fighting against our fellow worker, against the capitalists that hold all the resources and all the land and all the wealth? Are we fighting American imperialism? Are we fighting for the liberation of Palestinians? Are we fighting for a better future, where gender liberation is as much understood as the need for the overthrow of the capitalist system, in favor of a more equal and just society? That's all I have for you today, and as always, there are more essays to come. Thank you for watching.